Alright, my darlings, today we will go through lesson 513, changes in ecosystems. Changes in climate and changes caused by human activity can disrupt and transform entire ecosystems quickly. It may seem as though the ecosystems you've studied are permanent parts of Earth's identity and characteristics. However, that statement is far from the truth. Regardless of how much land they take up or how many organisms inhabit them, entire ecosystems are susceptible to change. Two significant causes of change in ecosystems include climate change and human activity. Change to ecosystems occurs both slowly and quickly. Since an ecosystem is a combination of its biotic and abiotic parts, a change to any part is likely to affect the entire system. For example, an Arctic ecosystem would change if large portions of its ice were to melt. A marsh ecosystem would change if pollution killed its main plant species. And a grassland ecosystem would change if its top carnivore disappeared. Removing lions from this ecosystem would initially affect other top predators. Hyenas, for example, would no longer have to compete with lions for food. It is possible that hyenas or other top predators would fill the niche left vacant by the lions. Predator populations keep prey species, such as zebras, healthy by killing sick and unfit individuals, and lions are particularly good at killing zebras and wildebeests. It's possible that populations of prey species will become unhealthy if lions are removed from the ecosystem. Populations of organisms in an ecosystem are affected by each other, and in many cases, populations depend on each other. Changes in temperature can cause a change to an ecosystem. White spruce, which is a type of conifer, inhabits ecosystems with colder climates. Today, it commonly grows in the northeastern United States and throughout much of Canada. However, about 16,000 years ago, it was abundant throughout Illinois and Missouri, where it's now rare or doesn't exist at all. Why are there few or no white spruces in Illinois and Missouri today? Well, about 16,000 years ago, the North American climate started warming after a long period called an ice age. White spruces, which need colder temperatures, must have found it too hot to live, and so they were outcompeted by other trees. A long-term shift in temperature causes a major change in an ecosystem. That change affects living things. For example, woolly mammoths once roamed Illinois. Their thick fur and massive bodies were advantageous during the Ice Age. As the Ice Age ended in Illinois, the mammoths may have found the new environment inhospitable. Warmer temperatures would have made it very difficult for the mammoths to maintain their body temperature. The mammoths retreated north, following the colder temperatures, and eventually went extinct as the habitat around them changed. An abrupt change in an ecosystem can be difficult for a well-adapted organism to handle. The organism suddenly finds itself adapted to the wrong ecosystem. Droughts can cause changes to ecosystems. For example, from 1987 to 1991, the Mojave Desert experienced an extended period of drought. During that time, scientists observed that large percentages of the plant life did not survive. For example, of the creosote bushes present before the drought, only 58% of the plants were alive at the end of the drought. Using this model of a Mojave food web, we can study the trophic levels of the desert. If the drought had continued, what possible impacts would this have had on the ecosystem? If the producers are unable to survive, all the consumer trophic levels above would be affected. In the Mojave food web presented here, the top predators are in the most danger because there are not many top consumers to begin with. Think about an energy pyramid. There is not much energy arriving at the top trophic levels. Top predators often are highly specialized organisms with very specific ecosystem needs. These species can act as indicators regarding the health of the rest of the ecosystem. Human activities, such as draining a wetland, can cause changes to an ecosystem. Historically, wetlands have been very misunderstood by human populations. Thought to be nothing more than a hindrance to farming, attempts to fill in or drain wetlands were widespread and extensive. Today, the ecological importance of wetlands is well known, and many laws are in place to protect them. Wetland plants and animals have many adaptations focused on aquatic living. For example, wetland plants have root systems that have adapted to living underwater. Wetland soil is called hydric soil because it is saturated with water and often builds up a layer of decomposing plant matter. Aquatic plants are adapted to aquatic living and are unable to survive in drier soils. Draining a wetland destroys the plants at the base of the ecologic pyramid. Fewer plants would mean fewer primary consumers. The number of organisms in each trophic level would change. Ultimately, the aquatic ecosystem would be replaced by a different ecosystem through secondary succession. The hydric soil would change and be replaced with a new type of soil. Many of the original wetland organisms would disappear from the area, and it is possible that local populations of the organisms could go extinct. In general, when an entire wetland is drained or dried up, very few, if any, of the original biotic factors can remain in the area. By some estimates, over half the wetlands that existed 200 years ago in the United States are gone. The passage of the Clean Water Act in the 1990s has slowed down the loss of wetlands. People have begun to realize the economic and ecological importance of these unique ecosystems. The introduction of a non-native invasive species into an ecosystem can disturb the natural balance within the system. The United States spends over $120 billion a year to manage the damaging effects of invasive species. Invasive species are organisms that have invaded established ecosystems. Through the actions of human travel and trade, new non-native species have arrived in North America. How do invasive species change an ecosystem? By changing the food web significantly, these organisms alter the structure of an entire ecosystem. Zebra mussels first arrived in Lake Michigan in the late 1980s. They most likely made their way to Lake Michigan as hitchhikers on cargo ships. Zebra mussels are filter feeders that remove algae from the water. Native organisms rely on algae as sources of food. Zebra mussels compete with native organisms for the algae present in the water. They're so good at filtering the algae out of the water that native organisms cannot compete, which interferes with the food that exists in the ecosystem. Human activities such as deforestation can cause changes to an ecosystem. It almost seems unbelievable, yet since the 1800s, millions of acres of forest around the globe have been cleared so that no trees remain in those areas. Changes to those ecosystems seem painfully obvious, such as total or near total destruction and collapse of the food web. Additional abiotic changes also occur to surrounding ecosystems. Erosion destroys topsoils and sediments fill waterways, lakes, and reservoirs. Important biochemical cycles are also affected, and in many parts of the world, the biodiversity lost with deforestation is immeasurable and irrecoverable. Modern forestry techniques help reduce the impact, and the importance of forest ecosystems on the planet continues to be discovered. Changes to an ecosystem can also happen when you remove a species from that ecosystem. Images of massive snarling teeth, vicious eyes, and dark fur helped propagate a fear and hatred of wolves. Out of misplaced fear, humans hunted wolves down to a few remaining individuals. Under the false hope that all would be well without wolves, the campaign to remove them from the ecosystem was successful. By 1926, the last wolf pack in Yellowstone National Park had disappeared. Nearly 100 years later, scientists are reintroducing wolves, hoping they can help save groves of cottonwood trees. So what's the connection between wolves and cottonwood trees? Wolves are important consumers in the ecosystem. The relationships between organisms are complex. Wolf populations affect elk populations, and elk populations affect cottonwood seedlings. When humans removed wolves from the ecosystem starting in the 1920s, elk populations began to change. As elk populations changed, the elk ate cottonwood seedlings. Cottonwood populations therefore declined. Today, scientists have reintroduced wolves to the ecosystem. Slowly, the community of organisms should return to a balanced state. Elk populations are naturally being controlled now by wolf populations, and cottonwood populations should eventually recover. Ecosystems are complex. When a change occurs in a trophic level, the other trophic levels are affected in some way. Biologists work to fully understand an ecosystem's structure and the impact human actions may have on it. And finally, one last human activity that can cause a change to an ecosystem is the introduction of excessive nutrients. The Salton Sea, which is a large lake in southeastern California, is a classic example of how excess nutrients can affect aquatic ecosystems. Some forms of pollution come hidden under the term nutrient pollutants because they are compounds that usually feed the growth of plants on land. Two common nutrient pollutants are nitrogen and phosphorus. Compounds containing these two elements frequently are used as lawn and crop fertilizers. 90% of the water flowing into the Salton Sea is irrigation runoff from those agricultural valleys. The area receives very little water in the form of rain, and the water in the lake is extremely salty. When the nutrients enter into an aquatic ecosystem, such as a freshwater lake, the effect on the plant life in the lake is the same as to the plants on land, but massively exaggerated. Plant growth also includes algae, which in great numbers can severely impact an ecosystem. Algae are the primary producers in many aquatic ecosystems. Algae flourish with the help of added nutrients. The algal bloom outcompetes the aquatic plants and the other organisms in the lake. The number of organisms at the producer level of the ecosystem is greatly exaggerated. In this case, both the biotic and abiotic factors in the lake are changed by the algal bloom. In extreme cases, the water can even become toxic to many native species. Changes to ecosystems often occur because of climate change or human activity. All ecosystems exist as a balance between biotic and abiotic factors. Complex food webs exist based on all these factors. When an ecosystem is altered through a change to either a biotic or an abiotic factor, a change to the entire system often results. Ecosystems are true systems, meaning that all parts of the system are interconnected in some way. Again, two major causes of change to ecosystems are climate change and human activity. Laws now exist to protect some ecosystems.